You can feel it long before you even look at your bank account. The rising rent. The once annoying but now terrifying electric bill. The shopping trip that costs more every month. Right now, millions of Americans are waking up to work, making long commutes, and asking painful, silent questions. These are not dramatic headlines or exaggerated stories. These are real people. A young woman who deposits money into her savings account on payday, then withdraws it to buy gas and groceries. A man working 6 days a week, driving 4 hours a day to work, admitting that he can't afford the one thing that makes him happy. Families staring at $600 electric bills and wondering what they're doing wrong. And the truth is, they're not doing anything wrong. In fact, if you've ever Googled cost of living in America in 2025, you know what's happening. Wages are more expensive than ever, and the gap between surviving and living has never felt wider. This video isn't just about the numbers. It's about the living reality behind the numbers. It's about understanding why everything is so expensive, how we got here, and what that means for the average American who feels like they're running around trying to stay in place. Stay until the end, because understanding the system is the first step to not being oppressed. The first thing you notice when you listen to young Americans today isn't laziness, entitlement, or unrealistic expectations. It's exhaustion, not the kind that comes from a long day, but the kind that comes from fighting a system that gets harder every year. In one of the stories that stuck with me the most, a woman in her 20s responds to older commentators who tell her to work harder, like they used to. Her response is direct. It's not the same. You've ruined this country. Behind the anger is a deeper frustration that the rules her parents followed no longer exist. And she's right about one thing. The economic landscape has changed in ways that older generations didn't have to deal with. In the late 1970s and 1980s, wages and housing still moved somewhat together. You could buy a house in your 20s without needing a 6-cent income or a decade of savings. Getting a college degree didn't require you to take on debt that would follow you into middle age. The costs of healthcare, childcare, car payments, all were significantly lower relative to your income. Today, adjusted for inflation, the average worker earns about the same as a worker in 1979. While the cost of living has skyrocketed by more than 70%, that's not to blame one generation. It's to acknowledge that America's financial foundation has shifted. Easy credit and low interest rates have inflated asset prices for decades, fueling housing and investment growth. Consolidation means that fewer companies control more essential things, from groceries to utilities to healthcare. When a market is dominated by a few players, prices don't just go up, they stay high, no matter how hard families struggle. And while older generations often had a single full-time job that kept the entire household comfortable, younger generations can barely pay the bills with 2 jobs. The result is a kind of psychological shock. People are told to follow in the footsteps of their parents, to work hard, to save consistently, to make smart choices. But the math doesn't back up that promise. The cost of entering a stable middle class has risen faster than wages, faster than opportunity, and faster than hope. So when young people push back and say it's not the same, they're not asking for sympathy. They're asking for honesty. Would you agree that today's American economy requires more effort for less reward than it did a generation ago? For millions of Americans, the housing crisis isn't an abstract chart or a news story. It's the moment you sit in your car after a long shift and wonder how you're going to pay next month's rent. A woman in Florida captures this beautifully. She pays $1,300 in rent, a $650 car payment, $300 in insurance, and still has bills, groceries, and everything else piled on top of that. Her voice cracks as she says, "I either eat or I pay the bills." And yet, she's thinking something like, which bill is coming late this month? That's not bad management. The cost of housing is higher than the average American salary, and the numbers back her up. The median home price across the country is between $410,000 and $420,000, nearly 6 times the median household income. The ratio, which was once 3 to 1, has doubled in a generation, making homeownership something that requires as much hard work as luck. Even renting, once an affordable alternative, has become its own struggle. A typical one-bedroom apartment costs about $1,500 a month on average across the state. Lower than the 2022 peak, yes, but still about 15% higher than before the pandemic. In many cities like San Diego, New York, Boston, and Miami, the same one-bedroom apartment can easily reach $2,500 or $3,000. Housing prices haven't cooled. They've simply reached a new, expensive normal. Why is this happening? It's not one of the reasons it's a perfect storm. For years, America hasn't built enough homes to meet demand. Construction slowed after the 2008 crisis and never fully recovered. At the same time, mortgage rates have risen from historic lows of 6% and 7%, closing the door on first-time buyers. Investors, from individual homeowners to large institutional buyers, have stepped in and bought tens of thousands of homes, converting starter homes into rental inventory. In states like Florida and Texas, homeowners insurance has skyrocketed as climate risks push up monthly homeownership costs even higher. When shelter becomes scarce and expensive, there's no pressure to lower prices. Families are forced to compete, and competition drives up the numbers even more. The impact isn't just financial, it's generational. The average first-time homebuyer is now around 35, the oldest age ever recorded. Renting has become a permanent situation for many, not a temporary step. Without housing, the wealth gap widens. People feel stuck, not because they won't work hard, but because the gateway to stability is blocked by rising costs and shrinking opportunities. And even for those who do get a roof over their heads, the story doesn't end there. When you get the keys, a new set of bills arrive, often more onerous than rent itself. We'll talk about these hidden costs below. For many Americans, the blow doesn't come from rent or mortgage. It comes from everything else that's piled up around them. Bills you can't avoid. The ones you don't think about until they show up in your mailbox and you're emptying your stomach. One woman recently shared her electricity bills from a hot Texas summer. She estimated they would be $560 for June, $650 for July, and $2,000 for August in 3 months. She didn't own a luxury home. She didn't waste energy. And she didn't live lavishly. She was cutting back wherever she could, cooking at home, avoiding unnecessary shopping, and still it wasn't enough. And while her bill was extreme, it reflects a national trend. On paper, the average electric bill is about $150 a month. But that number drops in real terms. In states with long heat waves, aging grids, or air conditioning that can cost upwards of $600, bills are common during peak months. Water costs have skyrocketed in many major cities. Broadband is now a nearly mandatory household expense, and auto insurance rates have skyrocketed across the country. Taken individually, each increase seems manageable. Together, they add up to a second rent. Then there's the cost of commuting to work. One man shared his routine, driving nearly 4 hours a day, working 6 days a week, and realizing he doesn't have the time or budget for the simple things he enjoys. He's not overreacting. Car payments tell the same story. The average monthly payment for a new vehicle is now more than $700, with many drivers paying more than $1,000. Used cars aren't cheap either. And between insurance, gas, maintenance, and rising interest rates, transportation has become one of the biggest financial drains on the average household. But the deeper problem isn't just price, it's necessity. Most Americans don't have reliable public transportation. They can't afford to give up owning a car, like those who live in dense cities or other countries. Work is often far from home, and there are no opportunities for millions of jobs. The commute trap reinforces the cycle. You need a car to make money, but a lot of that money goes back into the car. All of this creates a feeling that many people silently share. Life has become a long list of non-negotiable payments tied to existence. Not luxuries, not upgrades, but survival. And when even those basics push their budgets to the limit, the next place people look is the one cost they can't avoid: food. The grocery aisle is where many finally realize how tight things have become. And that's where we're going next. If there's one place where the cost of living crisis has shaken every American, it's the supermarket. You can negotiate a rent deferral, a car repair bill, a vacation, or the cancellation of streaming services, but you can't stop eating. And that's why so many people are losing control of their budgets in the aisles of Walmart, Aldi, Costco, and local supermarkets. One young woman put it perfectly when she said she tries to save money every time she's charged. He puts them aside, promising himself he won't touch them. And 2 days later, he's back at it. Not for luxuries, not for impulse purchases, not for food, not for gas, just for the basics needed to get through the next 2 weeks. Every time I put money into savings, he says I'll need it for something essential eventually. Not bad planning. That's a sign that even essentials have become too expensive. The data tells the same story. According to the government's updated food plans, a single adult now typically spends between $30 and $400 a month on food, depending on the city and diet. And even after the pandemic, prices are still rising by about 2 to 3% a year. The painful truth is that food inflation has never fully reversed. It has slowed to a higher base, meaning each salary buys a little less than it did a year ago. But it's not just the price, it's also the type of food people can afford. In many neighborhoods across the country, especially in low-income or rural areas, large grocery stores have closed or consolidated, leaving behind food deserts. In these communities, residents must rely on convenience stores, dollar stores, or fast food chains because there are no large supermarkets nearby. Fresh produce is harder to find and more expensive. Meanwhile, highly processed foods remain affordable. The economic fallout is predictable. Families trying to stretch their budgets by cheap, not healthy. This creates a hidden cost that most Americans feel but rarely talk about. Eating cheaper now means paying more later, through higher medical bills, lower energy levels, and the stress that comes with all the difficult financial decisions. Parents ration portions, skip meals, or substitute fresh ingredients with sustainable alternatives from the shelf because the math dictates it. The grocery bill becomes a source of anxiety, not nutrition. And when even basic necessities feel like an economic burden, many people ask the same painful question. If buying food is so difficult, what choice do I have with everything else? That feeling of being left behind doesn't end at the cash register. People stay home and pay their bills, credit cards, and monthly bills. Which brings us to the next piece of the puzzle, overcoming our growing reliance on credit. For a growing number of Americans, survival is no longer paid for in cash. It's financed. Not because people are chasing luxury, but because the cost of basic living has outpaced what their paychecks can cover. One of the most obvious examples comes from a founder who paid his own monthly bills. Rent, electricity, water, car payments, car insurance, groceries, and gas. Then he asked the question so many families whisper quietly at their kitchen tables. What can I skip this month and try to catch up later? That's not reckless budgeting. It's a system where income and expenses no longer match. Credit cards act as a safety net, but they come at a price. In the past year, American households have increased their total credit card balances to more than $1.2 trillion, the highest level ever recorded. The average interest rate is now more than 22%. That means any balance you carry month after month is growing faster than most people can afford. A $5,000 balance can easily turn into thousands more in interest alone if someone can't make more than the minimum payments. And most people with those balances don't use them for vacations or gadgets. Surveys show that nearly half of cardholders use credit cards to pay for essentials, groceries, rent, utility bills, or unexpected car repairs. Medical expenses complicate the situation. Even with insurance, high deductibles and out-of-pocket costs force families to use credit only to cover routine care. Emergency room visits, specialist appointments, prescriptions, nothing waits for someone to save. Health problems don't stop due to inflation. And when a bill arrives before a paycheck, a credit card becomes the only option. Over time, these cycles create a pattern of silence. Debt becomes normal, interest becomes expected, and financial breathing disappears. At the same time, salaries have struggled to keep up. When incomes stagnate but prices rise, debt fills the void. It becomes a tool that people rely on, not because they want to, but because they need to. It's a bridge between the life someone works for and the life they can currently afford. But it's also a trap, as that balance increases every month, squeezing the financial pressure that millions of people already feel. What makes it even harder is the emotional burden. People know they're doing everything they can. They're budgeting, cutting costs, and doing everything they can to be responsible. Yet the calculations still force them to rely on borrowed money. And with each blow, the feeling of being left behind increases. When the essentials of life require financing, what happens to a person's stability, confidence, or long-term goals? And how does this constant pressure shape the way Americans view the future? Which brings us directly to the final part of this picture. All of this is taking a toll on mental well-being and the fading promise of the American dream. When Americans talk about the rising cost of living, there comes a point when the conversation stops being about money and becomes about something much more serious. It's the point where people admit they're tired in a way that sleep can't fix. Tired of working long hours, tired of racing against bills, tired of feeling like progress is always out of reach. One founder described his routine: working 6 days a week, driving nearly 4 hours a day, and having no time or energy for the simple things he enjoys. He wasn't looking for sympathy. He was trying to make sense of a life where effort and reward no longer match. And this experience is not uncommon. Studies show that most Americans feel stressed about their finances every day. Rising rents, unpredictable utility bills, mounting debt, and the pressure to keep up create a constant sense of tension. Even when people do everything right, budget carefully, work extra shifts, and cut back on non-essential expenses, they still feel like the ground is shifting beneath them. It's not a personal failure. It's about living in an economy where the cost of living has risen faster than most people can afford to pay. The emotional toll is real. Financial pressures affect relationships, family dynamics, and long-term planning. Parents worry about caring for their children. Young people wonder if they'll ever be able to afford a home. Workers wonder if they'll ever get to the point where they're not being caught up. People are starting to feel disconnected from the future they imagined, as the path to it becomes increasingly narrow. This is where the idea of the American dream comes into the conversation, not as a nostalgia, but as a measure of how expectations have shifted. For decades, it was a simple promise: work hard, make good decisions, and life will gradually get better. That promise now seems more fragile. Homeownership has been pushed back a decade. Savings accounts aren't growing fast enough to keep up with rising costs. Economic mobility. The belief that each generation will do better than the last has waned. People aren't giving up on ambition. They're facing obstacles that previous generations didn't face. Yet even with these challenges, many Americans still hold on to something important: the belief that life shouldn't be about just getting ahead. They want time with their families to catch their breath and to be able to plan for the future, not perfection, but stability. That desire is the same hope that hasn't disappeared. It's become harder to achieve in today's economy. Which brings us to the final question. If the system seems so burdensome, what can people gain from understanding it? And how do we make sense of a future where the cost of living continues to rise faster than the options designed to support it? Let's wrap this up in a conclusion. When you step back and look at it all together, the housing crisis, the rising utility bills, the crush of supermarket aisles, the addiction to credit, and the pressures that this puts on people, it becomes clear that this is not just an economic story. It's a human story. The cost of living in America in 2025 is not measured in dollars alone. It's measured in the stress and time lost to dreams, because people are being deprived of so many basic things. But understanding the system doesn't mean accepting it. It means recognizing that these pressures are not personal failures. They are structural obstacles that millions of people face at the same time. The real question now is which part of this reality feels closest to your life: housing, food debt, or the feeling of running to keep up? And if this analysis helped you see with a clearer perspective why everything is so expensive, please subscribe and share this video, because no one should have to navigate this economy alone.